Dublin, early 2000s. Before sunrise, the streets of West Dublin were still and dark as 12-year-old Joseph "Joey" O'Callaghan climbed onto the back of a clattering milk float. He was eager and proud, a kid about to earn his first real pocket money. The dawn air was chilly, the neighborhood silent, as the small electric cart trundled along. Joey perched among clinking milk bottles, unaware that this ordinary morning would mark the start of a nightmare. He had no idea the man at the reins, local milkman Brian Kenny, was no honest tradesman. Kenny was a dangerous local gangster. Under the guise of delivering milk, Kenny was running a heroin distribution route. As they went door to door, Kenny would hand Joey harmless-looking grocery bags to drop off along with the milk. In reality, those bags contained heroin and cash. The boy gradually realized the milk run was a cover for something sinister. Once, a customer greeted them not for dairy, but with the jittery eagerness of an addict awaiting a fix. Joey began to understand why Kenny always insisted he keep quiet and follow orders. Kenny groomed the impressionable boy, drawing him deeper into illicit work. Joey became a lookout and a courier, ferrying cash and narcotics for Kenny's small but volatile drug gang. Kenny was capricious and violent. When displeased, he would fly into rages. Joey endured savage beatings, intimidation at gunpoint, and even sexual abuse at the hands of the man he once naively trusted. The teenager learned to flinch at Kenny's footsteps and to never ask questions. By the time he was 17, he was trapped and utterly terrified, a pawn in Kenny's criminal schemes. Isolated and intimidated, Joey felt he had no way out. Kenny warned him that the price of disloyalty was death. By 2004, Joey was living in constant fear. That April, he was dragged into a horrific crime by the man who had trapped him. On April 17, 2004, a young father named Jonathan O'Reilly was sitting in a car outside Cloverhill Prison in Dublin, having just visited an inmate. Without warning, a motorcycle carrying two men roared up beside O'Reilly's parked BMW. The riders were Brian Kenny and his associate, 24-year-old Thomas Hinchon. They opened fire through the car window, pumping multiple bullets into O'Reilly. The attack was a cold, calculated gangland hit. O'Reilly, only 25 years old, was killed instantly in the hail of gunfire. In the aftermath of the drive-by shooting, Kenny and Hinchon scrambled to cover their tracks. They turned to the one person they thought they could trust, Joey. The two killers thrust the murder weapon, the handgun used to shoot O'Reilly, into the teenager's hands and ordered him to hide it. Joey was terrified. He knew that if he obeyed and kept quiet, he would be protecting murderers and becoming complicit in further violence. But if he refused or went to the police, Kenny had sworn to kill him and slaughter his family. It was an agonizing dilemma for a boy barely out of childhood. For a brief moment, Joey pretended to comply. He took the gun as instructed. But inside, he knew he could not continue living in fear and silence. Summoning courage that belied his years, Joey made a fateful decision. He would betray his gangland captors and seek protection from the law. Under a veil of secrecy, he contacted his older sister and confided what had happened. With his sister's help, Joey slipped away from Kenny's hideout at Kilshane Cross. He went straight to the Gardai, the Irish police, and told them everything. At a secure Garda safe house, the frightened teen recounted the full story of Brian Kenny's criminal enterprise, the milk round drug operation, and the murder of Jonathan O'Reilly. He then led detectives to the hidden firearm that Kenny and Hinchon had given him. This evidence, combined with Joey's eyewitness testimony, became the cornerstone of the case against the two gangsters. Kenny and Hinchon were soon arrested and charged with murder, but even from jail, they attempted to intimidate the key witness against them. Joey received dire warnings. If he opened his mouth to authorities, he and his family would be killed. Despite these threats, the young man refused to back down. The Gardai placed him under armed protection as the trial approached, fully aware that his life was in grave danger. In July 2005, the murder trial of Brian Kenny and Thomas Hinchon began in Dublin. Joey O'Callaghan, just 19 years old, walked into court to testify against the men who had terrorized him. He described in detail how Kenny had groomed him from age 12, how the gang operated, and what happened the night Jonathan O'Reilly was slain. His testimony was vivid and harrowing, a rare inside account of a gangland murder from an insider turned informant. The prosecution also presented the recovered handgun and forensic evidence linking it to the shooting. After a tense trial, a jury found both Kenny and Hinchin guilty of the murder of Jonathan O'Reilly. Mr. Justice Michael Pert, in passing sentence, remarked that the ambush was as cold-blooded and premeditated a slaying of a young man as could be imagined. The two gang members received mandatory life sentences for the killing. Additionally, the court handed down further prison time for both men for threatening to kill the state's witness, Joey. The intimidation had failed. Joey's courage in testifying ensured the killers faced justice. With the verdict secured, the authorities wasted no time extracting Joey O'Callaghan from the public eye. At just 19, he became the youngest person ever admitted into Ireland's witness security program. He was quietly given a new identity and relocated far from Dublin to protect him from any revenge by Kenny, Hinchin, or their associates. The deal was simple. In exchange for truthful testimony, Joey would be kept safe by the state, a new identity, a guarded location, and a chance at a future. It was the only way to save his life, but it meant leaving everything and everyone he knew behind. Joey disappeared into witness protection, starting a lonely new life under constant guard. He struggled with anxiety and nightmares from his years under Kenny's control and spent a long time in counseling to recover from the abuse and stress. Even as time passed, threats against him persisted. On multiple occasions, Garda passed Joey confidential reports that credible plots to assassinate him had been detected. A grim reminder that Kenny and Hinchin, even behind bars, or their loyalists on the outside, might seek vengeance. Joey O'Callaghan would never again know the carefree anonymity of an ordinary life. But because he found the bravery to speak out, two dangerous men were removed from the streets, and a brutal murder was solved. To this day, Kenny and Hinchin remain in prison, serving life. They have repeatedly lost privileges for misbehavior behind bars, and any hope they had for early release was largely extinguished by the compelling evidence Joey provided back in 2005. The concept of turning criminals into state witnesses was still relatively novel in Ireland at that time. The witness security program itself had been established only in the late 1990s, spurred by the infamous 1996 murder of investigative journalist Veronica Guerin. In the aftermath of that killing, several members of a Dublin drug gang were prosecuted, aided by the testimony of the first state-protected witness, Charles Bowden, a methamphetamine chemist for the Gilligan drug gang, who agreed to testify against his boss in exchange for a drastic reduction in his own sentence. Bowden admitted to sourcing the handgun used to kill Guerin and to being deeply involved in the gang's narcotics empire. In return for his cooperation, he avoided a life sentence and was instead given a new identity and safe haven abroad upon release. His participation helped convict key gang members. Bowden's deal, accompanied by judicial remarks about his self-serving nature, set the precedent for Ireland's witness protection program, despite the moral ambiguities of relying on such testimony. But Joey O'Callaghan's case stood out. Never before had someone so young entered the program. His brave cooperation in 2005 demonstrated both the value and the peril of this strategy, proving that even a teenager's words could bring down hardened killers, albeit at enormous personal cost. For over a decade, Joey stayed silent, effectively erased from his old existence. Only many years later, in his 30s, would Joey cautiously emerge. First in an anonymous memoir and later in a rare recorded interview, to tell his story, using his own voice to warn other youngsters about predators like Kenny. A few years after Joey O'Callaghan's ordeal, another unlikely informant emerged, this time in Limerick, and this time a young woman caught in the grip of an infamous crime family. April Collins was still a teenager when she became romantically involved with Dundon, a member of Limerick's notorious McCarthy-Dundon gang. This gang was at the epicenter of a violent feud that gripped Limerick City throughout the 2000s. Two extended criminal families, the McCarthy-Dundon faction and their rivals, the Keane Colopy faction, were engaged in tit-for-tat violence that turned parts of the city into war zones. Dozens of shootings, pipe bomb attacks, and multiple murders were recorded at the feud's height. Ordinary residents lived in fear as the crime bosses settled scores with total disregard for bystanders. As a girl of 15, April found herself drawn into this world through her relationship with Jer. By her late teens and early 20s, she had a front-row seat to the gang's activities, and at times she was coerced into assisting them. Life with the Dundons was turbulent and dangerous. April witnessed firsthand the casual brutality with which the gang operated. She saw how they dealt with perceived traitors or enemies, intimidation, beatings, and worse. In one instance, April herself was pressured into helping threaten a witness who had crossed the gang. She later even found herself convicted of a minor offense for that act of intimidation. Fear pervaded every aspect of her existence. Speaking out or defying the gang was unthinkable. Like many in the gang's inner circle, April kept her silence out of self-preservation. In November 2008, the gang war in Limerick escalated to a shocking new low. A 28-year-old Garryowen rugby player with no criminal connections was mistaken for a gang target and brutally murdered. He was shot dead near his home in a case of mistaken identity as he walked to his girlfriend's house. The intended victim had been a drug dealer nicknamed Pitchfork McNamara, but the assassins killed innocent Shane instead. The murder of an entirely blameless citizen sent shockwaves through Ireland and proved that the Dundon gang's violence knew no bounds. It also deeply affected those close to the gang. April Collins knew that her boyfriend's brother, John Dundon, was suspected of ordering the killing behind the scenes. In early 2011, a turning point came for April. Ger Dundon, her partner and one of the younger Dundon brothers, was sent to prison on unrelated charges. With Ger locked up, April seized the chance to break away from the family. Their relationship fell apart, and she began distancing herself from the gang's criminal orbit. Now a young mother of several children, April had more than just herself to think about. She feared that if the cycle of violence continued, her kids could eventually become targets or collateral damage. Knowing what she did about the gang's inner workings put April in a dangerous but powerful position. After leaving Ger, she made the life-altering decision to do the unthinkable. She agreed to cooperate with law enforcement to bring down the Dundon empire. The Garda, long stymied by a wall of silence in Limerick's underworld, suddenly had a critical insider willing to talk. It was a risky gamble for April. The Dundon were infamous for punishing informers ruthlessly. But April understood that the only way to protect her family and find any semblance of normal life was to help put the gang leaders behind bars. In 2013, April Collins became a star witness in the special criminal court trial of John Dundon, who had been charged with orchestrating the murder of Shane Giogagan. Because of the extreme threat posed by the defendants, the case was heard by a panel of 3 judges in the special criminal court without a jury, an extraordinary measure typically reserved for terrorism and organized crime cases due to the extreme intimidation risk. She was not alone in this bold step. Her younger sister Lisa, who was dating another member of the gang, and a family friend named Christopher McCarthy also agreed to testify. Together, their insider accounts provided a damning picture of the gang's activities. In court, April described chilling conversations and events leading up to the murder. She recounted a night in the Dundon household before the killing when John Dundon convened a meeting with his crew. In April's presence, he discussed how he had tracked the movements of their intended target, and then he issued an order to a hitman, Barry Doyle. "The gun is there, you kill him," he told Doyle, while instructing others who would act as getaway drivers. April also testified that Nathan Killeen, another associate in the room, protested that things were not sorted, only for John to cut him off and insist the plan go ahead. The following night, Shane Giogagan was shot dead in error. Throughout her testimony, April Collins was visibly frightened. She knew the men she was testifying against had long instilled terror in the community and in herself. Indeed, when she first agreed to cooperate, Gardai took extraordinary measures to protect her. She and other witnesses were moved to secret locations under armed guard. Even in the courtroom facing John Dundon across the chamber was an ordeal. April did not mince words about her own past misdeeds. She admitted the times she had helped the gang under duress and explained why she initially kept quiet. This honesty likely bolstered her credibility. The presiding judges noted that while she was plainly terrified of the accused, she remained steadfast in her account of what was said and done. Her testimony was truthful and compelling, they concluded, and it was well corroborated by independent evidence like CCTV footage and mobile phone records. the Special Criminal Court took exceptional measures to ensure witness safety. Armed Gardai stood guard, and the proceedings were tightly controlled. At one pre-trial hearing, an enraged Wayne Dundon, John's brother, was observed making a slashing gesture across his throat toward Roy Collins's father in a bid to threaten him, a brazen display that only underscored the very danger the witnesses were up against. April's courage paid off. In August 2013, the Special Criminal Court found John Dundon guilty of murder for ordering Shane Giogagan's assassination. He was sentenced to life in prison. The verdict marked the beginning of the end for the McCarthy-Dundon crime network. Roy Collins himself had been targeted purely because his father, Steve Collins, once testified against a Dundon in an earlier case. After Roy's murder, the Collins family entered witness protection and ultimately fled Ireland to escape further retaliation. Now, with John and Wayne behind bars for life, that kind of terror against witnesses in Limerick finally began to recede. In the aftermath, Limerick's murder rate, once the highest in Ireland, plummeted, and the climate of fear in the city began to lift. But April wasn't done. She went on to testify in another major case, this time against John's brother, Wayne Dundon. Wayne was the gang's patriarchal figure, and he was charged for a separate heinous crime: the murder of Roy Collins, an innocent businessman who had dared to stand up to the gang. In that trial, April again took the stand to give evidence. Her information, alongside other witnesses, implicated Wayne Dundon in ordering Roy's killing. Like his brother, Wayne was convicted and given a life sentence in 2014, finally answering for the cold-blooded murder of Roy Collins. With the key Dundon leaders imprisoned for life and others in the gang taken down on lesser charges, the criminal empire in Limerick was effectively dismantled. In the aftermath, Limerick's streets grew noticeably calmer. A decades-long cycle of tit-for-tat bloodshed had been broken, in large part due to the testimony of April Collins and her family. In return for her cooperation, the Irish state offered April entry into the Witness Security Program. She and her children were quietly relocated and given new identities. For a time, she started a new life far from the city that had reared her. However, April found it hard to abandon her home forever. After the trials, she eventually resurfaced in Limerick, choosing to live back in her hometown despite the risks. She kept a low profile, but word of her presence did not escape the Underworld's notice. On at least one occasion, violence struck again on the streets, apparently in response to her return. Shots were fired in a drive-by near a house associated with her family, and a crude incendiary device was set off, presumed to be a warning. The message from the remaining criminal elements was clear. Her betrayal was not forgotten, yet April Collins remained defiant. Under discreet police watch, she continued to reside in Limerick with her children. In 2017, she married a new partner in a small ceremony, determined to reclaim some normalcy in her life despite the shadow of the past. April's story, a young woman who helped bring down one of Ireland's most feared crime families, reverberated across the country. It demonstrated that even the most entrenched gangs could be toppled when an insider bravely steps forward. But it also underscored the personal cost. April traded the danger of living within the gang for a different kind of danger after betraying it. Like Joey O'Callaghan, she must live indefinitely with caution, knowing that vengeful eyes may still be watching. The state can provide new identities and armed protection, but it cannot give back the sense of security she lost. Still, because of April's choice, a reign of gangland terror in Limerick was effectively ended, and the community her children will grow up in is far safer than the one she grew up in. As the 2010s progressed, Irish law enforcement continued to battle organized crime, from local drug gangs to international cartels. One of the deadliest conflicts to erupt was the feud between the Kinahan cartel, a powerful Irish drug trafficking organization with global reach, and the Hutch gang from Dublin's inner city. This feud turned city streets into battle zones, with at least 18 lives taken in tit-for-tat murders. The bad blood had begun the year before, when a Kinahan hitman assassinated Jerry Hutch's nephew in Spain, an act that demanded revenge. Gunmen from both sides then stalked each other on the streets of Dublin and even abroad. The most audacious flashpoint came on February 5, 2016, at the Regency Hotel in Dublin. That day, armed hitmen, some dressed as Garda ERU officers in tactical uniforms, and one disguised as a woman in a blonde wig, stormed a crowded boxing weigh-in event linked to the Kinahan group. Panicked attendees dove for cover as gunfire echoed through the hotel lobby. A high-ranking Kinahan associate, 34-year-old David Byrne, was cornered and shot dead in the melee. The attack was a direct strike by Hutch loyalists against the Kinahans and signaled all-out war. In the investigation that followed, Garda identified several suspects, including the alleged mastermind of the attack, Gerard the Monk Hutch, a veteran Dublin crime boss. Another man caught in the net was an unlikely suspect, Jonathan Dowdall, a former Dublin city councillor and one-time Sinn Féin politician. Dowdall had no typical profile of a gangland figure. He was a married father of 4 and had been known publicly as a community activist. But behind closed doors, he maintained shadowy connections with the Hutch family and dabbled in crime. He and his father had been involved in a separate violent episode, the kidnapping and torture of a man over a personal dispute, for which Dowdall was convicted in 2017. Now he was accused of assisting Hutch in the Regency Hotel murder plot. Initially, Dowdall was charged alongside Gerard Hutch for the Byrne murder, facing the possibility of a life sentence if convicted. For months he protested his innocence, but as the trial date neared, a dramatic development unfolded. In 2022, Jonathan Dowdall agreed to a deal with prosecutors. He would plead guilty to a lesser offense, facilitating the murder, and crucially, he would become a state witness against his former co-accused. In exchange, the murder charge was dropped. Dowdall received a relatively lenient sentence of 4 years in prison for his admitted role, essentially helping the hit team with logistics and a hotel room, instead of the far harsher punishment he might have faced for a murder conviction. It was virtually unheard of for an elected official to be so deeply involved in gangland affairs, let alone to then turn state's witness. The decision stunned observers, and it sent shockwaves through both criminal and political circles. By turning state's evidence, Dowdall entered uncharted territory. He was promptly moved to a segregated wing in prison for his own safety. Preparations were made to protect him and his family, as both sides of the Hutch-Kinahan divide would consider him a traitor of the highest order. At the high-security Special Criminal Court in Dublin, the trial of Gerard Hutch commenced in late 2022, with Dowdall as the prosecution's star witness. Over several days of testimony, he recounted meetings and conversations he claimed to have had with Hutch in the wake of the Regency Hotel shooting. Dowdall testified that a few days after the attack, Hutch confessed to him that he was one of the gunmen who shot David Byrne. According to Dowdall, Hutch was agitated and looking for help mediating the fallout of the feud. Dowdall, who had contacts among dissident Republicans in Northern Ireland, said he arranged a meeting in the north for Hutch to seek assistance from IRA figures in quelling the conflict and hiding weapons. In one of the most incriminating pieces of evidence, Garda had secretly recorded Dowdall and Hutch during a long drive to meet these intermediaries. On the surveillance audio, covertly recorded and later played in court, Hutch and Dowdall could be heard casually discussing aspects of the feud, the need to dump 3 yokes, guns, and the ongoing tensions with the Kinahans. Dowdall also claimed Hutch showed him rifles in a stash house and asked for help moving them. Though Dowdall's cooperation provided an inside narrative of the Hutch gang's activities, it soon became clear that his credibility was a major weak point. Under cross-examination, defense lawyers highlighted inconsistencies in his story and probed his own criminal past. Dowdall had previously lied to authorities and even lied to the Republican contacts he approached, at one point falsely claiming IRA membership to gain their trust. His involvement in the earlier torture case also cast a long shadow over his character. The judges, sitting without a jury for security reasons, approached his testimony with caution, aware that a self-confessed criminal might have motives to shift blame or minimize his own role. In April 2023, after 52 days of evidence, the Special Criminal Court delivered its verdict. Gerard the Monk Hutch was found not guilty of the murder of David Byrne and walked out of court a free man. The court concluded that while Hutch likely had knowledge of or involvement in the broader feud, Dowdall's testimony alone was too unreliable to eliminate reasonable doubt of Hutch's direct guilt in the Regency attack. The judges sharply criticized Dowdall's pattern of lying and alternate character modes, noting that without strong corroboration, they had to treat his claims with extreme skepticism. The state's gamble on the informant had not secured the conviction of its high-profile target. For Jonathan Dowdall, however, there was no return to normal life after the trial. He had publicly branded Jerry Hutch a killer in open court, an act that in Gangland eyes made him a marked man. Even though his testimony did not jail Hutch, Dowdall had broken the Underworld's sacred code of silence. Immediately after the trial, authorities finalized Dowdall's admission into the witness security program. He was formally accepted, and preparations were made to relocate him abroad under a new identity once his prison term for the lesser charge is complete. His wife and children would also be given new identities, as the threat extended to anyone associated with him. Dowdall is expected to serve his sentence in protective custody and then vanish into exile, likely in another country far from Ireland. Police and security services, in whatever new home he finds, will be responsible for his safety going forward. Intelligence assessments have deemed Dowdall under a severe and continuing threat from criminal elements. The Hutch faction, who now know he betrayed them, and the Kinahan cartel, who likely would target anyone involved in the Regency attack fallout, both have motive to wish him harm. In essence, Dowdall traded a longer jail term for a shot at freedom, but it is a heavily qualified freedom that will require him to live in secrecy and perpetual caution. While Dowdall's cooperation did not bring about the legal outcome authorities hoped for, it did shine a rare light on the inner workings of Ireland's most notorious gangland feud. The case showed that even well-connected criminals can be motivated to turn informer under enough pressure. It also illustrated the limits of such testimony. Without solid evidence to back up an informant's claims, courts remain reluctant to convict. Nonetheless, the fact that a prominent figure like Dowdall flipped sent ripples of paranoia through organized crime circles. If a city councillor could secretly record conversations and work with police, gang leaders had to wonder if any associate might one day do the same to them. Some of the most significant cooperation with law enforcement has come from within paramilitary organizations, where secrecy and betrayal carry even higher stakes. During the last 2 decades, in the wake of the Troubles, it became apparent that both Republican and Loyalist armed groups had been deeply infiltrated by informers. Security services on both sides had long cultivated spies in these outfits, and by the 2000s virtually every paramilitary faction was compromised to some degree by a member secretly on a state payroll. The paramilitary informers often faced even deadlier consequences for their treachery than civilian informants. One dramatic example came to light in 2005 with the exposure of Dennis Donaldson. Donaldson was a veteran member of the Provisional IRA and a high-ranking Sinn Féin official. He had spent decades as a trusted operative in the Republican movement. He was once photographed alongside IRA hunger striker turned politician Bobby Sands, and by the early 2000s he headed Sinn Féin's administration at Stormont, the Northern Ireland Assembly. But all the while, he was living a double life. In late 2005, Donaldson confessed that he had been recruited by British intelligence in the 1980s and had served as an informant for approximately 20 years. His unmasking sent shock and disbelief through Sinn Féin and the IRA's ranks. Here was someone who had been at the elbow of leaders, privy to strategy meetings and secrets, secretly reporting to MI5 and the police special branch. The circumstances of Donaldson's outing were extraordinary. A few years earlier, in 2002, police had raided Sinn Féin's offices at Stormont, alleging an IRA espionage ring, a scandal dubbed Stormont Gate. Donaldson himself was arrested and charged with possessing sensitive documents, accused of gathering security force information for the IRA. The incident collapsed the power-sharing government at the time amid the furore. But in late 2005, those charges against Donaldson were abruptly dropped with no explanation. It soon emerged why, under threat of exposure by his handlers, Donaldson decided to come clean to his comrades. On December 16, 2005, he recorded a statement for broadcast on national television and calmly revealed, "I was a British agent at the time. I was recruited in the 1980s after compromising myself during a vulnerable time in my life. Since then, I have worked for British intelligence and the RUC PSNI Special Branch." He apologized to his Republican comrades and to his family for his deceit. The revelation that a Republican stalwart had been betraying the cause for 2 decades was described by Ireland's Prime Minister as bizarre as it gets. It was the biggest insider scandal to hit the IRA since 2003, when another senior IRA figure, Freddie Scappaticci, alleged to be a high-ranking British mole codenamed Steak Knife, had been exposed. Scappaticci had ironically headed the IRA's internal security unit, tasked with unmasking informers, even as he himself was secretly on the British payroll. Donaldson's confession made undeniable the depth of infiltration in the movement. If informers in Gangland faced danger, informers in the IRA faced near certain doom. Dennis Donaldson surely knew the risk he was taking by outing himself. After his confession, he was immediately expelled from Sinn Féin and became a marked man. He quietly retreated to an isolated cottage near the village of Glenties in County Donegal, living without electricity or running water. The once influential operative now existed in near solitude, reportedly spending his days by candlelight and cutting turf from the bog to stay warm. A few months later, in April 2006, the inevitable happened. In the evening silence of that remote cottage, armed men burst through the door. Dennis Donaldson was shot dead at point-blank range, his body left sprawled by the hearth. The 55-year-old's violent end was as decisive as it was expected. Years later, a dissident Republican faction, the real IRA, claimed responsibility for assassinating him as punishment for his treachery. Donaldson's fate served as a grim warning. Within the world of Irish Republican paramilitaries, betraying the cause was the ultimate sin, and it would be repaid in blood. On the other side of Northern Ireland's divide, in the fiercely loyalist paramilitary gangs, similar dramas unfolded. One of the most significant loyalist informers in recent times was Gary Haggarty, a former commander in the Ulster Volunteer Force, UVF, in North Belfast. Haggarty led a UVF unit during the later years of the conflict and into the supposed peacetime of the Good Friday Agreement era. But he and his men continued to engage in terror and organized crime. In 2009, Haggarty was arrested for a range of violent offenses, including sectarian murder. Facing the possibility of multiple life sentences, he took an unprecedented step. He agreed to become a supergrass for the authorities. There had been supergrass attempts before in Northern Ireland, notably a 2012 trial where 2 UVF turncoats testified against dozens of their comrades. But that case collapsed when a judge found their evidence unreliable. Despite that checkered history, authorities believed Haggarty's cooperation was too significant to pass up. Over the next several years, Haggarty provided a monumental trove of information on UVF operations. He was interviewed more than 1,000 times by detectives in one of the biggest and most complex cases ever undertaken in Northern Ireland. When his testimonies were compiled, they ran over 23,000 pages of transcripts. Haggarty admitted to his own heinous deeds as part of the deal, including involvement in 5 murders, 5 attempted murders, some targeting police officers, and directing terrorism. The catalogue of offences stretched over a 16-year period from 1991 to 2007 and included the loyalist murders of several innocent Catholic men, among them a 66-year-old grandfather shot while babysitting his grandchildren. The lengthy charge sheet included not only killings, but also aiding and abetting murder, kidnapping, possession of firearms and explosives, hijacking, false imprisonment, arson, intimidation, and riotous assaults. One of Haggarty's murder victims was indeed a 66-year-old man, Sean McParland, who was gunned down while minding children, a cold-blooded sectarian execution that highlighted the cruelty of Haggarty's UVF reign. Yet all the while, he was also a paid police informant, feeding tidbits to Special Branch even as he carried out violent acts. In his debriefings, Haggarty would later claim that some of his handlers turned a blind eye to planned murders or failed to act on warnings, a revelation that raised disturbing questions about collusion during the Troubles. In exchange for his sweeping cooperation, prosecutors agreed to a vastly reduced sentence for Haggarty. He pleaded guilty to over 200 terrorist-related offences. The judge imposed a life sentence for each of the murders, but then slashed the minimum jail time dramatically to reflect his assistance. In January 2018, Haggarty was effectively given just 6.5 years behind bars. Having already spent years in custody during negotiations, He was released in May 2018 and immediately placed into a secret witness protection arrangement. The brevity of his imprisonment, just a fraction of what 5 murder convictions would normally entail, outraged the families of his victims. Many in Northern Ireland questioned whether justice had been sacrificed. Indeed, the Court of Appeal later ruled that Haggarty's sentence was unduly lenient, though by then he was already free and in hiding. In the interim, prosecutors reviewed the extensive evidence he provided to determine whom they could charge. It was understood Haggarty had named 14 fellow loyalists, implicating some in 4 additional murders, and identified 2 former Royal Ulster Constabulary officers he alleged had protected him. There was a significant police presence around the Belfast courthouse when Haggarty made his plea, a reflection of how divisive his deal was. After his release, he vanished to an undisclosed location outside Northern Ireland, equipped with a new identity and guarded by security services. Haggarty's information did lead to some subsequent trials. In 2023, he testified against another loyalist, James Smith, accused of a 1994 double murder of Catholic civilians. During that testimony, Haggarty coolly detailed how Smith and another UVF man, Mark Haddock, had plotted the killings and how he, Haggarty, supplied one of the murder weapons. However, even with Haggarty on the stand, the outcome was mixed. The defendant was acquitted in 2024, with the judge highlighting discrepancies between Haggarty's story and other evidence. In the end, Haggarty illuminated many dark truths about the UVF's campaign and even cast a light on police misconduct. But few others went to jail as a result of his cooperation. His 6-year sentence was widely perceived as a form of impunity. A man who had personally taken lives was effectively free, while some of his victims' families never saw full justice. Still, from the police's perspective, Haggarty's case removed a top loyalist commander from the streets and delivered an intelligence windfall on decades of unsolved crimes. Informers and infiltrators remain a crucial weapon against violent subversives. In 2020, for instance, a long-term MI5 agent who had secretly joined the ranks of the dissident New IRA orchestrated a sting operation that led to the arrest of much of that group's leadership in Northern Ireland. The agent, known to his comrades simply as Dennis, lured senior New IRA members to a rented house outside Belfast for what was supposed to be a secret meeting, not knowing the venue was wired with surveillance devices. When armed police later swooped in to make arrests, the spy vanished overnight, spirited away by British intelligence into a new identity. His betrayed comrades were left stunned, realizing that a man they had treated as a trusted friend was working for their enemies all along. It was yet another reminder that even the most secretive organizations can be betrayed from within, and that those who do so must leave their entire life behind in an instant. Each of these informers, Joey O'Callaghan, April Collins, Jonathan Dowdall, Dennis Donaldson, Gary Haggarty, and others like them, contributed in their own way to bringing down criminal enterprises or terror networks in Ireland. Their cooperation with law enforcement yielded extraordinary results. Vicious gang leaders were imprisoned, murder plots were foiled, and terrorist infrastructures were exposed. But these victories came at great personal cost to the informants themselves. They uniformly faced threats to their lives. Many had to be spirited away into hiding, often taking their immediate families with them. In the history of the Irish Witness Security Program, only a few dozen people have ever been protected, and those few know the lonely road it entails: new names, new homes abroad, and the erasure of their past. Some, like Donaldson, paid with their lives for the choice they made. Others live on in anonymity, knowing any day could bring an attack if their cover is blown. Within the underworld, the names of informers become cautionary tales. To gangsters and paramilitaries, they are traitors, rats to be dealt with mercilessly. The underworld's code of silence remains nearly unbreakable, which is why turning informant is such a rarity. Yet from a societal perspective, these insiders-turned-witnesses have proven pivotal in solving crimes and breaking cycles of violence that might otherwise have continued unchecked. Organized crime by its nature thrives on fear and silence, a code of honor among thieves that stymies traditional policing. Time and again, investigators have found that the key to cracking a syndicate is someone from within willing to talk. One honest testimony can unravel an entire web of crime. These informants were rarely saints. Many were deeply entangled in crime themselves before they flipped. They made the choice to cooperate, often after reaching a personal breaking point, when the fear of staying loyal outweighed the fear of betrayal. Ireland's witness security program remains a small and shadowy operation, activated only in the most extreme cases. It quietly safeguards those few who step forward, providing them new lives at the price of their old ones. Uniquely, Ireland's program has no specific law governing it. Instead, it operates through confidential Garda procedures shrouded in secrecy. This flexible, covert approach is intended to protect identities and adapt to each case's needs. Deals offering reduced sentences, immunity, or protection have proven powerful incentives to entice accomplices to help crack complex cases. Still, authorities are judicious with such bargains, knowing that relying on a criminal's word is a double-edged sword. A case can collapse if a judge or jury finds an informant unreliable. For every high-profile informant who takes the stand, there are others whose cooperation remains secret. In some cases, suspects provide intelligence confidentially to guide investigations without ever revealing their identities in open court. A low-level drug courier's tip-off might lead to a massive narcotics seizure overseas. A former gang enforcer might debrief detectives behind closed doors, mapping out a crime network for them. These quieter informants also play a critical role in dismantling gangland structures piece by piece. They may never make headlines, but their information can stop murders, intercept drug shipments, and save lives in the shadows. In the end, the legacy of these gangland informers is etched in the convictions and the criminal networks they help demolish. Dublin's milkman-killer duo rots in prison because a boy found his voice. Limerick's reign of gang terror was quelled because a young mother put her children's safety above the code of silence. A vicious underworld feud was exposed in court because a conflicted politician sought a way out. And in Northern Ireland, decades-long secrets of war and peace were dragged into the light by men who once dealt in darkness. Their stories are both inspiring and sobering, true crime sagas that illustrate the power and the peril of breaking the code of silence. Each informer made a momentous decision to cooperate, altering the course of Irish crime history while forever altering their own fate. Theirs is the double-edged legacy of the gangland informer, hailed for helping bring justice, condemned for betraying the underworld, and destined to live with the consequences of that choice for the rest of their days. In a world of shadows, justice sometimes hinges on a single act of courage, the informer's decision to speak out. Ireland's gangland informers have altered the criminal landscape with their testimony, proving that even in the darkest corners of organized crime, the truth can find a voice.